everything they have going. They need to clean slate, clean house, and start over.
Oh, see, you agree. They had a great transfer window then.
Still think they lack a little bit of firepower to scare teams, and yet in saying that, I want to argue with myself. They've got 7 wins on the road.
Hello and welcome to This is MLS. It is the international break, but we have 6 enticing MLS games for you, all with major playoff implications. And my lovely panel today, crew that never takes a break. We've got Sasha Kleshton, Taylor Twellman, and Kaylin Carr. And Sasha, for missing last week, we gave you a little bit of homework, and that was to tell us today, in 44 days, how will the Western Conference playoff picture look?
It's the hardest assignment I've ever had, Jill.
Stop it. Stop it.
LAFC, I got them at number 1. They're going to leapfrog LA Galaxy. They've got 3 games in hand. They've just got to make up 5 points. I think they can do that by the end of the season. The toughest decision for me, though, was that 4, 5, 6 area. I got the Vancouver Whitecaps finishing ahead of the Seattle Sounders, also because of games in hand. And the Whitecaps get 4 of their last 5 games at home to pick up full points. In the end, the 8 and 9, I got Dallas jumping up, leapfrogging Minnesota United because Dallas is getting all their pieces back. Velasco, Musa, Ferreira, healthy and ready to fight for the playoff spot.
What made you take LAFC over the Galaxy?
Well, it's games in hand. I think the quality that they have with Olivier Giroud coming in, and then with 3 games in hand, they get a chance to make up those points pretty easily.
I'm not so sure about the games in hand, and I would sort of caution against that at this point in the season for a number of teams, whether that's New England trying to fight their way into the playoffs or Columbus Crew going through, although they've actually been probably the most, giving me the most confidence that they can make up that ground. And that's where I start to have some questions for LAFC leapfrogging LA Galaxy. And you know, I think we just saw this weekend where they looked tired. They looked a little bit run down, and who could blame them after everything they've had going on? So you think of the way that LAFC now have to go into this weekend and the international break playing against Houston. They're going to be missing 5 players: Buwanga, Oliveira, Bogusz, Campos, Chanot, Martinez. That's a big group to now have to compensate for. And then even as you look towards the stretch, El Tráfico, I think that's a toss-up, as we've seen over time, coming up in 2 weeks. And then we also have Cincinnati at Cincinnati right after the Open Cup final. So I'm not so confident about them being able to take those points in hand. And that's where I would lean towards sticking with LA Galaxy.
It gets interesting, doesn't it, guys? Because September 14th, that match day after the international break, so many of these questions are going to be answered. You've got El Tráfico, and then you've got Portland, Colorado as well. And I find that one to be interesting because I think there's a good debate there of whether or not this win against Seattle over the past weekend, now all of a sudden does Portland have confidence that they can win a game 1-0 without their 2 most exciting attacking players, designated players in that conversation? Sasha, I agree with you. I think LAFC bypasses the LA Galaxy. The LA Galaxy lost to St. Louis City. They should not lose that game, whether or not Ricky Puig is available or not. And I just think with Kai Kamara being, if Olivier Giroud's not available, we saw how explosive they are with Kai Kamara. Timothy Tillman comes back. I just think 3 games in hand, they don't need to win all 3 to catch up with them, especially if they win September 14th. I do think LAFC is the number 1 seed coming out of the West.
I want to talk about the team that you have finishing in 6th place, Sasha. The Seattle Sounders make the rare trip to the Columbus Crew this weekend in what is an old guard versus the new guard matchup, a team that won MLS Cup in 2016 and 2019, and the Sounders taking on the reigning champs. The Sounders uncharacteristically shut out in back-to-back games. Taylor, what is the best way for the Sounders to get the offense going against Columbus?
Oh, I don't even know if that's possible. Second fewest goals scored from open play. That's remarkable when you say that. I've gotten into some interesting conversations after Portland-Seattle because I said it during the game, and I've said it now for a while. If you're relying on Rusnak and Morris to lead this team to where this team was over the last 7 years, I'm sorry, it's not going to happen. Those guys are complementary players. Christian Roldan, Albert Rusnak, Jordan Morris combined have 3 goals, 4 assists between the 3 of them against playoff teams. And you guys can look at the stats and look at the numbers and how good they are, but in the biggest moments, those three players haven't delivered. Now, when they have delivered, it's been Ladero, it's been Dempsey, it's been Obafemi Martins, it's been Rui Diaz, complemented by the Jordan Morrises and the Christian Roldans. I'm on the record. I'm going to stay on the record. I think the Seattle regime is done. I think they can get through the playoffs and win games 1-0 or go to penalties and advance that way. But second fewest goals scored in all of Major League Soccer from the run of play. That includes Nashville. That includes Chicago. That includes New England. I can give you all the teams, guys. Seattle's the second
do you remember what
fewest.
you called those teams
I just
last
don't
week?
think they have a good enough word.
Remember what
Pardon
you
me?
I said, do you remember what you called those teams last week?
I do. And by the way, they all delivered.
Did they email you? Should have seen my
Nope.
inbox.
No, Taylor, I think the
Truth
point
hurts.
that you make on the lack of signings to really upgrade and take it to the next level, and you mentioned those guys like Dempsey, Martins, Ladero, and that's what I thought they expected from De La Vega. And I think that's where the disappointment has come, where he might be able to extend the lifespan of this group to continue to fight for silverware, and we just haven't seen that. And I think even now when he's come onto the pitch, there's been moments where you can see the quality, but it almost feels in some ways that he's pushing it and he's trying to prove everything for making up for lost time, and he's not quite 100%. And so that's where I say, okay, well, the profile of maybe the player that they're bringing in at just 23 years old, he's not really a finished article himself even at this point, whereas we saw Ladero, we saw Dempsey, we saw Rui Diaz coming in much closer to the prime of their career where they were already proven, and that's where that risk management starts to come in and more of the load starts to fall on Roldan and Morris and Rusnak, as you mentioned. They've continued to develop some young players, Reagan, Obed Vargas, some nice guys have come through, but that top-end talent to compete in this arm race that we see in the Western Conference, that's where I agree with you here, that they're kind of lacking, and that's where we see them falling more into the middle of the pack.
4 MLS Cups, they won 2 of them, CONCACAF Champions League title, all of that. Where do they make those signings? Kalen, you and I are saying the same thing, just in a different way. They made them in the summer, and De La Vega was the winter. And since Garth Lagaway has left, who have they signed? De La Vega? That's an unknown quantity. Martins, Dempsey, Rui Diaz, Ladero, they knew exactly who they were. They were going to be aggressive in the summer. They're going to go for it. There is no chance that this team is going to be able to compete with the top 5 to 6 teams in MLS, not having made a summer signing in 3 years. It's remarkable. 3 summers they've gone by without signing a single player, and that was their trademark. Since Garth Lagaway's left, so is that aggressiveness in the transfer market, in my opinion.
A team that's starting to say we can compete is the Houston Dynamo. This past weekend, flipping the script on LAFC, beating them in their own building 2-0. And the story of 2023 from everybody across the board, every analyst was saying, how good can this Ben Olsen side be when they get a number 9? They go out and get Ezequiel Ponce. He scores what proves to be the game winner against LAFC. Now there's a rematch this weekend in Houston. Is Ponce enough, Sasha, though, to take Houston, a team that fell in the Western Conference Championship to LAFC, to now an MLS Cup?
No, I don't think he's enough to take them to MLS Cup, and it's unfortunate now that Lawrence Anali, the German winger who comes in, tore his ACL against LAFC when he was a really a bright spark plug off the bench and looked very good. Listen, this game in Houston this weekend is going to look a little bit different than last weekend in downtown LA because LAFC is physically and emotionally exhausted after the League's Cup final, then the Open Cup semifinal. Denny Bouanga specifically, he looked physically dead in the last 2 games. Now he's gone. So Steve Cherundolo is actually forced into making many changes because of the international break. I think you'll see a fresher LAFC with some younger guys who have something to prove this weekend. And I think Houston is going to lack that direct running that Lawrence Anali brings to this team.
They're going to miss Anali. There's no doubt about it. We just saw the way he burst off the page in that second half coming off the bench, and you gave us a sneak preview of what could come, and I think they really could still make some noise in the playoffs. I would expect them to beat LAFC this weekend. I think we saw them do this last year in back-to-back matches during the regular season, and then it was in the playoffs where they, in the way I put it, was they kind of got a nosebleed when they went to LA and realized that they had met their level in a knockout. But the one thing I would say about the way they played is that's kryptonite for LAFC. The way they were able to play through the middle, control the ball. I mean, LAFC couldn't get close to Artur, couldn't get close to Hector Herrera, and that's what we've seen Columbus do. So that style of play has continued to cause problems for LAFC, and I think that formula speaks well for Houston. They've missed that number 9 in the box to sort of sniff one out and get it in the back of the net, but I do agree, Anali, missing him does sort of cap their ceiling. Sasha, I have Houston higher than you do. I have them in 5th. I think you had them in 7th in the Western Conference. If Anali was there, I think they could potentially even push Colorado, although I like Colorado and I expect them to hold on to 4th place. But I think Houston in the transfer window went out, and Ponce coming in, Hector Herrera being fully fit and healthy, I think this is a team that can make a push down the stretch.
P.S. Until this weekend, there was one team that had beaten LAFC in the last 4 months, and that was the reigning champions, the Columbus Crew, who've done it twice. So it is a statement by the Houston Dynamo, and they'll look to keep that going this weekend. Let's head north of the border to British Columbia. The Vancouver Whitecaps playing host to FC Dallas, and they'll be without their captain, Ryan Gauld, and for a good reason. It's his first call-up in a decade to Scotland's national team for a pair of Nation League games. He was included in the senior squad back in 2014, but did not feature, so Gauld, at 28 years old, could debut against Poland or Portugal in this coming week. Sasha, you surprised it wasn't sooner?
It's about damn time, Jillian. Ryan Gauld has been fantastic for the past couple of years, and the Vancouver Whitecaps in Major League Soccer. He has so much quality in the final third. Maybe in the international game, he's a little bit small and slight, and the international game can be much more physical than Major League Soccer, so that perhaps is why he hasn't been called up. But he has definitely earned this call-up to Scotland, and I'm really excited to see him play. Unfortunately for Vancouver, he's gone this weekend, and even with him there, I'm not sure they're more than just a second-round playoff team. So we're going to see what Dallas can bring. I'm excited about what Dallas can bring to this game because they're starting to finally get all their healthy players back. Musa, Velasco, and now Ferreira as well. Peter Luxan has to do a really good job of trying to figure out a way tactically to get Sebastian Lletget and Paul Arriola all on the field at the same time with his superstars.
I have to ask you, while we're on the topic, Sasha, you had Dallas getting that 9th spot. Currently, they're in 11th after blowing a lead to Colorado. Why'd you have them in 9th? What has you believing, I should say?
I like the way that they've been playing under Peter Luxan. I like the way the midfield is playing with Yaramendi and Sho, the new midfielder, the 2 box-to-box guys, and the way that they've been able to build out through the back. I think Sebastian Lletget is finally healthy and in a really good place, and when he's on, he's a very, very good player in that system. Adding in all the healthy guys up front. I don't know what kind of match rhythm Velasco and Ferreira and Peter Musa are going to have, but they're going to have to find it and gel fast. But I like the quality that they have.
So while Vancouver won't have Gauld, they'll have their new signing in 32-year-old Stuart Armstrong coming on a free transfer after helping Southampton earn promotion back into the Premier League. Former teammates of Gauld at Dundee United, 51 caps for Scotland. Taylor, all year we've said, what has the Vancouver Whitecaps one step away from being a contender? And it was making another signing, someone around Gauld. Is Stuart the right move?
I think it is. I mean, I still think there could be a little bit more firepower in the final third. If Brian White is not healthy, they really don't have another threat. And yet I look at what they are going to do at the end of the year. First off, they have a game in hand. I think they can make a push for a home playoff game. I absolutely 100% do, because when you look at the remaining schedule with the game in hand, only 2 of those, 6, 7 games are on the road. So they're going to play predominantly on their turf. No pun intended. That's home field advantage in and of itself, because away teams hate coming to Vancouver playing on that surface. They could go into the playoffs with real momentum, and with the game in hand, they could play themselves into that home playoff game. But if Brian White is not fully healthy and playing at a high clip, I still think they lack a little bit of firepower to scare teams. And yet in saying that, I want to argue with myself. They've got 7 wins on the road. That's the only team other than Houston that has 7 wins on the road. So getting into the playoffs, they could actually do something.
FC Dallas at BC Place, the lone nightcap, 10:30 p.m. Eastern Time on MLS Season Pass. Now we welcome in Matt Doyle, joining Caitlin Carr, myself, and Sasha Kleshton. St. Louis City is going to look to keep it rolling this weekend when they head to Gillette Stadium to take on the New England Revolution. And when we talked 2 shows ago about summer signings and who won the summer transfer window, Doyle, you were shady and picked the Chicago Fire. Sasha, you picked Charlotte FC. Caitlin, you weren't on that show, so I want to give you a chance here. Where would you put St. Louis City when you look at the summer transfer window?
There's been some pretty good ones. Olivier Giroud comes to mind. I thought my Houston Dynamo
going to
done a good
LAFC.
job. But I do think that St. Louis has completely remade their team in a new direction, and I think even beyond the summer window to just prior to that of the teams that got rid of their managers. I think this club has gotten the biggest bounce with Hackworth coming in, and I think he's really reimagined this team. They play different. It's more of a mid-block instead of just that sort of high press that we saw from Carnell. They're playing through pressure a little bit more. They've dropped Edward Leuven a line deeper, and then, yes, the new additions have been fantastic, Toyshirt and Hartel, but also don't leave out Simon Betcher because he has been a big part of this, adding really some defensive pressure from that front line, but also some quality in and around the box. And just the vibes have changed. I did a few of their matches in Leagues Cup. They took Club America to the wire. We did not expect that. And I think that's where the shift in mentality has come, the expectations, where when they're playing at home against the LA Galaxy team, the top team in the West, without Ricky Puig, I wasn't shocked that they beat them. I wasn't shocked that they took care of business. And that's one of the best things I think you could say is, yes, they're still down and, toiling near the bottom of the conference. But you look around the teams, Nashville, you think of San Jose, some of the teams that also made changes, and you're not seeing a big bump or a new direction or a lot of confidence or inspiration coming from that group. Whereas from St. Louis perspective, you can see how it's changed their season.
I'll just add
Caitlin, I agree with you.
Go ahead, Sash.
Sorry.
No.
I do think it's too little too late for this St. Louis team this season, but I do think they've made some very good moves that help them build for the future. Hartel and Toyshirt, they both look like very good, high-level, quality players that are going to help. So I don't think they make the playoffs or make a run for it, but it makes them better in the long run. The person I feel the worst for personally is head coach Bradley Carnell, who got let go before having a chance to get through a summer transfer window and add these quality players. He was a victim of his own success from year 1, doesn't make it past the midseason of year 2, and now John Hackworth is doing a good job. I do like the way he's changed the way they've played a little bit. It's allowed Leuven and Durkin to form a really good partnership in the midfield, and St. Louis looks like they're on the way up.
Would it look the same with Carnell?
Well, I mean, Carnell, part of what the head coaching job, the head coaching change was all about was changing that game model. And I think there was a lack of belief within St. Louis's front office in Bradley Carnell's ability to get this team to play a way that sort of emphasized having the ball. If you look at the way, I just pulled the numbers before we were on the show. If you look at the way they played through mid-July before when Bradley Carnell was let go, they were the highest upfield of anybody in the league. They had the highest direct speed of anybody in the league, which means when they get the ball, they go. And that's reflected in the percentage of passes they play forward. They were the only team in the league that played over 40% of their passes forward. It was all 1,000 miles an hour. And part of that was because they did not have enough talent. And when you don't have enough talent, you want to ugly up the game. And Bradley Carnell was right to do that. But I understand if you're the management there, you say, this guy really has only one way. We want to bring in a coach or at least give an interim a chance with these players who are going to have the ball more. And we saw it in those highlight clips. They're getting up the field on the ball instead of winning second balls to get up the field. They're attacking with more width. We saw it on the Jaden Reed assist to Hartel. And look, it is tough on Bradley Carnell because it's 6 new starters in one window. And I don't think I've ever seen that before in MLS, but you can't argue with the results or the way they've played so far. And John Hackworth happens to be the recipient of a little bit of good luck and good timing in that regard.
New York Red Bulls taking on Sporting Kansas City. The good news for the Red Bulls is they're still sitting in 4th place in the Eastern Conference. However, 1 win in 9 across all competitions. A striker away from being a trophy contender was the drum that this group has been beating all season. They don't go out and get one. 4th place in the East, probably as far as they're going to get, Doyle. Does that summarize the Red Bull season as a disappointment?
I mean, I guess so, but I guess the disappointing is that this isn't particularly disappointing. This is just the Red Bull way. They're going to leave their team a piece short of real contention just indefinitely. They've done it for more than a decade now. If you look back, the last time the Red Bulls, I think, were really stocked and had elite talent at just about every position, you would argue, I think, 2015, maybe 2018, though I think that 2018 team actually overachieved. 12 draws on the season. If they had an elite number 9 in this roster, how many of those are wins? How many times would they be able to just end a game early and not have to expend so much energy to come away with a point or occasionally 3? So it's disappointing, but the bigger disappointment is that this is just business as usual for this club.
Yeah, I guess so, but being 4th in the East, that's progress. They got into the wild card last season, and then got knocked out immediately by Cincinnati. So for me, look, if you look at the 4th seed in the East, it almost feels like nobody wants to come and claim it. Like New York City have been dropping points, dropping results. They have not been able to grab it. Charlotte, same thing. We thought the transfer window was going to change things for them. So these draws might actually secure them home field playing 4th. And the big question for me is, can they get Forsberg healthy? If he comes back into the team, which is a huge question mark at this point because we don't know where he's been, he's the type of player they haven't had in the playoffs since, I'll say it, Sasha Kljestan, to be able to grab the game a little bit and put your foot on it, control a little bit with the rhythm. And that's the way we've been able to see a bit of an evolution and a step forward from Sandro Schwartz. We just haven't seen it as of late because Forsberg hasn't been there.
Sitting on the...
Sorry, Jill. I don't think this season's been a disappointment. If I look at this team, the New York Red Bulls, new coach, foreign coach who comes in and doesn't know the league, and I look at the roster, I actually think they're overachieving this season to be in 4th place in the East right now. If I look at the rosters of, say, Philly, Orlando, New York City, I'd rather take that roster compared to the New York Red Bulls roster. So I do think they're overachieving. The problem is, I agree with you, Matt, that this is a good team, not a great team. It's a playoff team, as they always are. And they're not going to win anything again. And it seems like the Red Bull brass seem to just be okay with that, which sucks to watch as a fan.
Yeah, that's the disappointment right there. And in the context of having had this conversation about big transfer windows, as you mentioned, Olivier Giroud comes in for LAFC, and this is a team that is already at or near the top of the table. Miami go out and bring in David Martinez, who's a Paraguay international center back. We saw that Galaxy bring in Marco Reus. This is what big market clubs are supposed to do. Red Bulls don't act like a big market club. Sasha's maybe right. Like in the context of the amount of talent on this team, I guess that's not disappointing to see them in the
My question
sport.
was, guys, just to clarify, it was should the fans feel disappointed that they didn't go out and get that number 9? And I think we're all in agreement.
I still have a lot of Red Bull fan friends, and I can attest from my DMs that they are all very, very disappointed in the lack of direction from this club in the summer transfer window.
To your point as well about it being a major market is they don't have to do as much enticing as, say, an FC Cincinnati or another team has to do. It's LA, it's Miami, New York, where foreign big-name players want to come. And the Red Bulls have that.
Once upon a time, it was Roberto Donadoni, Lothar Matthäus, Yuri Djorkaeff, Thierry Henry, Sasha Kljestan, world stars.
Bradley Wright Phillips.
In our game.
See, but see, Matt, this goes back to when I was playing there. I'm not a big star. You can't throw my name. I know you're doing it in jest, but with those guys, you can't. I was asking the club as a player to bring in a high-level number 10 to play in front of me to take us over the edge. They wouldn't do it. We never got that MLS Cup. And it's still the same 8 years, 9 years later.
Before we move on, I just think because the fans are probably jumping out of their chairs and they want to know, was there one guy you had in mind, Sasha?
For what, Jill?
For that number 10 role back in the day?
No, there was nobody in particular, but I just had wished that they would bring in a DP number 10 to be the difference maker for our team, and I would play a little bit further back behind him, pulling the strings from deeper. Unfortunately, we never did it.
Understood. Chicago taking on DC United. Let's transition to that one, shall we? In the Windy City, both on the outside looking in. If you had to pick one, Sasha, who are you taking?
Oh man, you guys are really forcing my hand today. If I had to pick one of these two teams to make the playoffs, it would be DC United, just because they're only 2 points back of a playoff spot. in that dogfight in the Eastern Conference. The only other reason I would take them is because looking at the stars of their team, I would take the biggest star, and that's Christian Benteke. He's been the one who has shown up consistently this season for DC United. He has a pretty good partnership with Jared Stroud, and he's been putting the ball in the back of the net when he's supposed to. If Benteke can keep doing that, they can make the playoffs. Will they make the playoffs? I don't think so, because the defense is too weak and gives up too many goals. They don't have enough quality all over the field. But in Benteke, I can trust a little bit.
I think trusting in Benteke is the right call, and I think not trusting that defense is also the right call. I frankly don't think either of these teams are going to make the playoffs. For Chicago, the argument on their behalf will be that they actually have 4 pretty good players up the spine, and Chris Brady, Kellen Acosta, Brian Gutierrez, and then Hugo Kuipers, who's been very good for them as a number 9. And the other argument is they have a really soft schedule. Like, I looked at the remaining 8 games. There's a lot of Nashville, Montreal, and hosting DC United. And if you were ever going to make a run as a Chicago Fire, now would be the time to do it. And they missed the playoffs this year, which, again, I think they will. That'll be 7 straight years without a postseason for them. The league record is 8, set by Toronto FC from 2007 to 2014. There will be a ton of pressure on whoever remains from this group next year to break that streak.
I'm sorry, you guys just went through Red Bull's bemoaning the depressing state of things, or you wish for more. And then you're going to lead to the Fire? I mean, this is from bad to worse. You mentioning just that they have 4 solid players up the middle, and that's their hope. I mean, what's depressing, more depressing than that? Maybe you're saying that they won the transfer window by just getting rid of Shaqiri.
That clean slate is the best thing you could have hoped
They're
for.
They're continuing to fight.
If you're a Chicago fan.
Yeah, they're continuing to fight. I'll give them that. But Chicago Fire should not be a playoff team based on their performance this season. Everything they have going. They need to clean slate, clean house, and start over.
Oh, see, you agree. They had a great transfer window then.
You know who is holding on to the final playoff spot in the Eastern Conference? Atlanta United, 9th place, and big news this week coming from the club parting ways with their technical director and vice president, Carlos Bocanegra, who's been there since day one. Atlanta president and CEO Garth Lagerwey putting out this statement saying, "We are deeply appreciative of Carlos's dedication and success over the last 9 years with Atlanta United. However, I believe it's time for our club to move in a new direction. While we will continue to fight for a playoff spot down the final stretch of the season, this gives us a clean slate and a runway to properly assess all vacancies in our sporting operation ahead of what will be an extremely important offseason for our club." I was in Atlanta for all the highs and most of the lows. There's 2 parts of Carlos Bocanegra's tenure. He assembled a roster that made the playoffs in their inaugural season. Atlanta won MLS Cup in year 2, Campeones Cup in 2019, and they were 1 win away that year of going back to MLS Cup, falling to Toronto FC in the Eastern Conference Final. Since then, Sasha, it's been a revolving door of coaches, and Atlanta United has not won a playoff series since 2019. Carlos Bocanegra's tenure, it's a long one, 9 years. Will it go down as a success?
For me, it is a success because the first 3 years of Atlanta United were remarkable for an expansion team where I think a lot of us had doubts as to whether Atlanta was going to be a soccer city. And all that immediate success captured the imagination of all the fans in Atlanta and fans across Major League Soccer, to be honest. I played in the very first game in Atlanta United's history in Atlanta, and it was amazing. And from that moment forward, we knew that this was a legit club in Major League Soccer. And so all that success they had in the first 3 years is so important to building a club, to building belief, to getting the city to buy into you, which they have now. Of course, over the last 4.5 years, things have been pretty bad in Atlanta. But I have to say that the success at the beginning from Carlos Bocanegra and helping build this club is very important, and it will go down as a success for me.
Yeah, I have to agree. I have to agree with that because, of all the things that Sasha just said, and that was so important as far as setting the standard. Now, the problem is that it hasn't lived up to that. And when you look at the new teams that have come in since they came in, there's some new standard bearers. I think LAFC probably being the biggest of them. And so now the expectation amongst the fan base is to compete for trophies every year. And since Tata Martino left, honestly, it's looked like just a revolving doors was, I think, the word you used, Sash, which is right. Of all the different managers that have come in and they haven't been able to find success. There you go. Sorry, Jill. But I mean, seriously, and that's where it's saying, I've been critical of saying, okay, well, where's the sense of urgency here? Because these changes continue to happen, but there's not a lot of vision behind it. I think that's what Lagerwey is talking about as far as trying to clean slate. And now the new manager coming in will have 2 designated players, and the new sporting director will have 2 designated player spots. They brought in Moranchek during this window, but now a little bit more flexibility to build a new roster, because this season, I have to say, it's been pretty much a wash. It's gone downhill with the expectations coming in. I remember sitting at this desk thinking, could they challenge for the Supporters' Shield? Could they move up? At this point, with Thiago Almada and Giacomakis and all these big players and stars that we saw, and it just hasn't lived up to that. And so that's where I think, of course, you're going to see people go out. But as far as Bocanegra goes, I think those early years, you can't take anything away from what he was able to build for this club. And almost at that point, that's where the expectations are, which is good. And then just as a club, they failed to live up to it.
Opening now at coach, technical director, and 1 designated player spot open. Doyle, what's the best path forward for Atlanta?
Hire Chris Henderson. He's worked with Garth Lagerwey in the past. They're the guys who built that great Sounders team together that won 2 MLS Cups, went to 4, and obviously won CONCACAF Champions League. By that time, Chris Henderson had moved on to Inter Miami, where he has done great work building this roster. Obviously, Messi, Suarez, Busquets, Alba, he's not the guy recruiting those, but he's the guy identifying players via the super draft, making good signings out of South America, sort of squeezing every last dollar out of every single roster mechanism there is available. He has maybe the best resume of any CSO, or excuse me, any GM in the league who's not technically a CSO, because right now he's not calling the shots in Miami. There are 2 very involved owners. There's a very involved coach, and they just hired a new guy, Raul Sanllehi, who is the club president, and he literally kicked Chris Henderson out of his office and took his office. So I have to suspect that Chris Henderson is going to be available and is maybe going to want a new challenge. And if you're that kind of guy who's at that level of accomplishment in this league, getting the budget that you get in Atlanta and the fan base that you have in Atlanta and the level of involved ownership that you have in Atlanta that has always been a positive for that team, I think that's pretty attractive. And I frankly would be surprised if Chris Henderson was not the new GM, technical director of Atlanta United in 2025 under Garth Lagerwey.
You make that change before you find the coach?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. But then you have to work together, and it all has to be simpatico as you're building out that roster. It does need to happen quick, for sure.
Doyle, you said it's pretty attractive. This has got to be the most attractive job in Major League Soccer. If I'm a fan of Atlanta United, just think of how spoiled you've been since day one. You became a fan of a team that has spent the most money in Major League Soccer, like ever, in transfer fees, bringing players in. They've brought in big-name coaches. They've had championship expectations every single season. So if I'm an Atlanta United fan, yes, it's been a poor season. But imagine you started this season with a World Cup winner and one of the best strikers in Major League Soccer. It didn't work out. Next season, you're going to have a new technical director, a new coach, and be sure that they're going to spend lots of money this offseason bringing in some players to complement Alexei Moranchuk, who already looks like a very good soccer player.
The one thing I would look for in a managerial hire is, yes, Garth Lagerwey, Chris Henderson, if he arrives. You have the trust, of course, and the experience to know MLS. But I think when going back for me, for Tata Martino, you can't replace a manager with some real panache and that pedigree to be able to go into somebody's living room and convince them to come to Atlanta or convince them to become a part of this project. And so I think they'll be looking at some big names, of course, as you mentioned, with the attraction that's going to come to it. Patrick Vieira is one that has MLS experience. That'd be a name that I would look at as a potential perfect fit. We've seen how good he likes to have his teams play. He understands the league. He understands what it takes to be successful here. I would love to see that hire made, or a similar sort of profile of manager that has sort of like some panache that can go out and bring some players in.
And Tata Martino is the correct shout. You look at a player like Joseph Martinez, and I can speak to this because I was alongside covering that team for 5 years, but the only man who was ever able to wrangle Joseph Martinez and make him listen in that moment was Tata Martino. And I think that you need a manager who can do that with the roster and commands respect in that moment. And I do want to say it because I didn't answer the question about success with Carlos Bocanegra, but as somebody who was around the team for so long, he was always really lovely and accessible to deal with from a media perspective. I always really appreciated him. And I'll never forget when covering the expansion draft in 2017, and you think about Atlanta United coming into the league, they came into the league alongside Minnesota United. Who's done what in that time? It's no disrespect, but that used to be the bar, that you could kind of limp your way through the first few years of MLS play. And Atlanta United changed that, and Carlos Bocanegra was their technical director. So I would absolutely summarize his tenure as a success. Now, should it have gone on 9 years? I think that's the big question, but I think all coaches, all GMs, all technical directors have an expiration date, right? That's part of the business. But on that note, we've got 6 games coming up. Atlanta United, not one of them. They'll be back in action on September 14th, hosting Nashville SC. 6 games on Saturday night. You guys have anything else to say before we wrap this show up?
Good, yeah.
It'll be nice to really be able to focus on 6 games, won't it?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. All right. Well, all of you, go enjoy it, and we'll see you next week.